Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. This is Amy Livingston with the Freight Plan Project team. And while I'm sad we can't be there with you today to kick off this particular project, I'm very glad you've taken the time to join us virtually. We have some important information to share today, and we're looking forward to your feedback. First off, I did want to mention that this meeting is being recorded and made available on the project website for viewing later on for those who are unable to participate, or if you have some sort of any type of technical difficulty today. Um, Before I turn over this freight advisory meeting to the chair for a few minutes, I wanted to start off with some housekeeping items. This is our first meeting that we're doing virtually. So I'd first like to point out the audio information. If you look to the top right corner of your screen where you'll see audio, those are instructions. When you join the meeting, you should have been asked how you'd like to join the meeting from an audio perspective. So if you'd like to be able to talk later on, it's important that you select dial out and enter your phone number. That will trigger Adobe Connect to call you, and when that happens, you need to answer the call and dial 1 to be entered into the conference. If you didn't do that, we do have those instructions on the top right of how to join now. And we'd ask that, obviously, unless you are called on to speak or the floor is open, that you mute yourself so we can avoid background noise. And you can just mute yourself using your regular phone that you're familiar with or within the software. I did want to point out the chat box. It's in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to use this chat box at any point during this meeting. You can ask technical questions about the software, like if you haven't been able to figure out how to get on the audio, or questions about the presentation. Victoria will work with you to make sure that the audio is working if you want to go ahead and chat that. Making sure that we hear from you guys is one of the biggest considerations when designing this online meeting. So there will be set points during the presentation where we'll go through questions. This will ensure we don't miss anybody. So when we start this segment, Jenny or Sarah will turn over the quote-unquote virtual microphone to me, and I'll begin reading aloud the questions first that we've received throughout the presentation. And then moving from there, I'll ask you guys to raise your hands. So how can you raise your hands if we can't see it? I'd like to point out that feature to you. If you look to the top middle of your screen, it's on that top navigation bar that has several icons. On my screen, it's the furthest icon to the right, which happens to be dead middle. There's a person with their hand raised. If you click that to raise your hand, we get a notification that your hand has been raised, and also an icon will appear next to your name in the participants window. Does everybody see that hand? Do you want to give it a try now? All right, there we go. Now I see some people raising their hands. Perfect. And if you click it again, it will go away. Thank you. And then finally, there's one more trick up my sleeve. Throughout this meeting, we'd like to have you guys take some polling questions to help us better prepare for the next meeting and in developing the plan. Since these times are uncertain, it may be a while before many people feel comfortable gathering in a group, so we'd like to evaluate how today went so we can make future meetings better. So please note, though, that if you have any trouble or missed any of this or wanted to share feedback but were unable to, please follow up with Sarah afterwards. She's always available. So now I do want to turn over the floor for a brief minute to our Freight Advisory Chairman, Mr. Skipper.
Thank you very much. First, for those of you that I don't know, my name is Kenny Skipper. I am the chairman of this committee. I currently serve on North Charleston City Council, and I also run a logistics company, trucking company here in town, CMC Logistics. So I have a couple of different hats, that make this information important to me. But again, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your time. It's important that all the stakeholders contribute because this is an extremely important infrastructure item as we go forward and our region continues to grow and develop. I'd like to thank Sarah and Amy and the team, and we look forward to a lot of good information. And with that, I will turn it back over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny. Appreciate it. So with that, we're going to get started with today's meeting. All right. Um, so as our kickoff meeting for this particular plan, I'm first going to introduce you to the rest of the team that you'll be working to develop this regional plan. Then we'll talk a little bit about what freight planning is and then what that means for our region. And then we're going to discuss how this process will move forward. So I am joined here today by Sarah Cox from the Berkeley Charleston Dorchester Council of Governments and Jenny Humphreys from CDM Smith. We also have members of the study team, the consultant side, who are also here as well, who will be listening and taking notes as you guys talk. Sarah is the project manager for BCDCOG. She will be your main point of contact as you all move through this process. She'll be herding all the cats and answering all the questions and will be a wealth of knowledge to you all, especially with her background at BCDCOG and her experience in planning. Jenny Humphreys is a senior transportation planner with CDM Smith. She has experience working on many freight plans across the Southeast, such as the Central Line Freight Plan and the Charleston Area Plan, and she will be leading this team of consultants as well. So at this point in time, I am going to turn over the floor to Sarah, and I will see you guys in the chat box.
Thank you, Amy. And again, good afternoon, and I thank everyone for being on our Freight Advisory Committee meeting today. This is totally, I guess, not to say my comfort zone, but I definitely love to be in a room and actually engage face-to-face. But I do think this would be a great opportunity for us to kind of spread our wings with new technology and be more productive as we move forward. Again, I'm Sarah Cox with the BCDCOG, a transportation planner. I will be serving as the PM on this project on the COG side. I think most individuals on this committee has worked with the COG on some other committees or in some capacity. However, for those that may be new to the COG is pretty much one of 10 regional planning councils. We serve the 3 counties in our region, Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, as well as up to 27 of our municipalities. To date, we are currently planning for roughly 760,000 individuals. Our prime objective, we pretty much assist our local governments in developing their local and regional planning for the region. We provide not only planning support, but also technical support to improve regional opportunities as well as the quality of life for individuals in our region and visitors as well. So certain aspects of planning that we conduct would be, for example, comprehensive planning. We do water quality management, economic development assistance, workforce development, etc. The COG also is the designated metropolitan planning organization for our urban CHATS area. So we do the long-range transportation planning for our urban area, and we also work with DOT on our transportation planning for our rural area that's outside our CHATS area, which is our BCDCOG area. Just to get some background of what kind of initiated actually doing a dedicated regional freight plan. We've done the long-range transportation plan and have addressed our freight issues in our area as a component of our long-range transportation plan. However, we are very mindful of the exciting time in our region, the growth, as well as development in terms of our freight infrastructure. The port has our port harbor deepening project. There's expansion projects. We've just gotten online in terms of our inland freight facilities. The Hugh Leatherman terminal is close to coming online. So there's a lot of freight and good movements happening in our region. And we definitely want to take a closer look and be well positioned to help support the growth and development that's happening in our area. Can we press forward, Amy? So in terms of that, we initiated this and we are developing this plan for our area, not in a vacuum. We definitely see that we need to take a closer look at freight within our region. However, we are very mindful that we add to the bigger picture of freight at the state level as well as the objectives of the national freight movement and economic development of the development of our nation. So we are working in partnership with the BCDCOG and very closely with FHWA as we produce this plan. We will be working in terms of data collection and making sure our regional goals and any projects coming out of our region definitely aligns with the bigger picture of freight and goods movement in our state and beyond. And I will pass this back to Ms. Jenny to take
Yes.
in terms of
Thank you, Sarah. So before we jump into, this is Jenny Humphreys with CDM Smith. I'll be the project manager for the consulting team. Before we jump into introducing the consulting team, I'd like to see if anyone, Diane Lackey perhaps, would like to say a few words on behalf of the South Carolina Department of Transportation.
Sure, Jenny. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank the Chat Freight Advisory Committee and the CDM Smith team for bringing us all together today. My name is Diane Lackey. I work in the Intermodal and Freight Programs Office at SCDOT with my partner in crime, David Gray, and we both work for Doug Freight in that office. I think today we're going to frequently hear the term freight is the economy. And that is very true in South Carolina and specifically the Charleston area where international commerce has been a key driver of your economy for centuries. The South Carolina Department of Transportation is committed to improving mobility to facilitate freight and logistics movement as well as for economic growth in our state. An example of that is the Rural Interstate Freight Network Mobility Improvement Program, which is designed to improve reliability and productivity, reduce travel costs, and sustain the economic health of the state. The program was developed in part to prepare for the increased freight movement that South Carolina is expecting in the coming years, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. Internally, freight planning and movement associated with the SCDOT project feasibility process has come into the forefront. With that predicted growth in mind, we are very excited and encouraged that you are taking a regional approach for freight mobility planning. With the business development and the growth that continues in your region, I think we all agree it's a smart approach. So focusing on the region allows for overall improved reliability, productivity, and capacity needs in your areas, and should result in a plan addressing quality of life, which Sarah was mentioning, land use, business and employment-related activities. Because of the logistics connections associated with your study and the upcoming Appalachian Regional Freight Mobility Plan, both David Gray and I will be participating in your regional planning project so that we can keep those connections going from the state level SCDOT and not work in absence of each other. So with that, we look forward to working with you, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jenny.
Thanks, Diane. So I'd like to briefly introduce our consultant team. For those of you not familiar with who CDM Smith is, we're an engineering and planning consulting firm. We've got a national and international presence of about 5,000 employees, and our freight planning practice has extensive experience in pioneering statewide level freight mobility plans and multi-level or multi-state freight plans such as Latin American Trade and Transportation Studies, close to 2 decades ago. And more recently here these last several years, working closely with South Carolina DOT on state freight planning and then also Columbia, their regional freight mobility plan, and Charlotte, North Carolina, their regional plan as well. So we're bringing a lot of interesting experience to this. I'm based here in the Charleston area, and I'll certainly be drawing from my colleagues firm-wide in their various disciplines of expertise. We'll be working very closely with two partners on this. Trans-Systems Planning and Engineering is a key partner. They will be working specifically in the arena of rail planning, rail intermodal planning and engineering, and supporting those outreach efforts with our partners in those industries. And then Modern Mobility Partners, they are a DBE firm out of Atlanta, Georgia, and they specialize in areas related to freight technologies, traffic engineering, and helping us with the data-driven project prioritization process as we get closer to having a final plan in place. I want to make a couple of notes on transportation equity. As the project manager, as the senior planner of this team, it's very important to talk about the role of a regional freight mobility plan as it pertains to transportation equity. A lot of times we've heard this kicked around before as it pertains to, say, transit planning or land use or affordable housing planning. And there's so many interesting and challenging things facing our country right now in terms of pandemics and racially motivated protests and things like this that are very challenging for many of us. But bringing that into a transportation plan, I personally want this group to understand that our philosophical approach to developing a plan like this, it's not so much a traditional plan in that we're going to focus on congestion and moving vehicles through the region as quickly and safely as possible, but it is an integrated plan between the transportation system of all modes and what's happening with land use and development, as Sarah alluded to, quality of life, and a huge part of that is the economic stability and resiliency of this region and our state as a whole. And this transportation network, it not only means moving vehicles quickly or efficiently and safely, but mobility also means access to economic opportunity. Mr. Skipper, I'm sorry, I can't call you Kenny. It's just not I'm not programmed that way, but Mr. Skipper, you alluded to having a business in transportation logistics in the region, and you know as well as anybody that the time is money, and the more successful your business is, the more people have access to that economic opportunity as well. So we take that very seriously, and that's the root of what we do with a regional freight mobility plan. So I look forward to your partnership in that. Moving into the Freight Advisory Committee, and who is on the call with us today. Sarah has composed this team of Freight Advisory Committee members who span a wonderful cross-section of organizations, companies, state agencies, public entities. Sarah, were there any thoughts you wanted to pass along in terms of kind of reinvigorating and bringing this group back together today?
Yes. For some individuals that's been around since we reinitiated the Freight Advisory Committee about a year ago, we just want to acknowledge that this group is, again, a reinitiation of the Freight Advisory Committee that came together to actually help guide and develop this regional freight plan. But we're also looking at continuity and implementation of this plan beyond. So we are positioned to not only be contributing to the development of this plan, but we are definitely looking at positioning this committee to be involved in freight planning way into the future. So we are also looking at not just having a static committee, but where we could actually bring in individuals as the planning process goes along. So today I just want to acknowledge and really show my appreciation for everyone who is participating. Again, as Jenny said, I think we have a really great diverse mix of individuals. I want to acknowledge all local jurisdictions, for example, North Charleston, City of Charleston, Mount Pleasant, having their planning and engineering staff present. the counties or Dorchester, Berkeley, Charleston counties and economic development sector is also represented. We have, again, private sector. We have the SC Trucking Association involved, and some freight trucking companies, for example, Hunter and HJ Trucking. We have the Port Authority and rail representation. So I'm really, really grateful, and I think we have a diverse enough group that could let us really see the needs, opportunities, and really make our region competitive in a more proactive way, since freight and good movement is so ingrained in our environment and in our region. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So looking ahead to what your job is, you could be wondering, what am I in for? Sarah may have briefed you or warned you, whatever the right word is here, but we are very excited about your participation in this. And what we thought we would do is just kind of give you a little more insight into what we hope your role will be moving forward. Number one is learning. You know, some of you know freight inside and out because you do it all day, every day, but hopefully we'll bring some information to you that perhaps you didn't know before. But ultimately, if you don't know the ins and outs of this plan, then it'll be very hard for you to champion it. So we'll have a lot of educational opportunities throughout this process. We certainly invite your feedback throughout. We have lots of data sources available to us that we'll be using, but they're only as good as the data could be. They're so much better when we get your input on the validity of the data and the reasonableness of the recommendations we're making. We hope that you will connect with colleagues and raise awareness of this plan. Hopefully, as mentioned several times before it's all said and done, we'll be able to have these meetings together in person and build those relationships, and then maintain some momentum around the plan. I'm sure you know lots of plans and lots of projects, they feel like they die on the vine, and we certainly do not want that to happen here. This plan is in many ways just a beginning for lots of future work. It could be spin-off plans or getting a new project built or perhaps championing a new policy for the region. And we need you to maintain that momentum. And as we move forward, that can be accomplished by making a concerted effort to be at as many of these events as possible. I know we're all busy, and goodness knows we have no idea what lies ahead in terms of our work programs with the world the way it is, many people working from home and whatnot, but we'll do our best. And then finally, as Sarah said, supporting the implementation. Our job is to provide you all data and information and ideas and concepts, and ultimately it will be up to all of you on the phone to own those recommendations and support the eventual implementation of those. So before we jump completely into the basics of freight planning, we'd love to ask you a quick question about what is your interest in the development of a freight mobility plan. Of course, we can look to see who you're here representing, but what is your interest? Are you representing others, constituents? Are you a technical professional? Are you in the transportation industry, moving goods every day? What is your interest here? And you'll probably see this question again in the future as we move ahead with additional outreach efforts, and we look to get that 360-degree perspective on input into the plan. So we'll want to compare feedback from different types of audiences. Give everybody just a second there. Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so just a real quick note, if we do have any sort of technical difficulties, you may hear from some of my colleagues. A number of members of the CDM Smith team are on the line. So in case we have some sort of a technical difficulty or audio issue, you'll hear from one of my counterparts as we move through this. But the goal of today's meeting is to really get you inducted or introduced to the freight mobility planning process. So as you're listening, I'm probably going to be sharing a lot of information that could be new to you. Some of it could be old news, some new news, but please feel free to take notes or ask questions in the chat box, and we will have some time at the end of these different sections to talk through some questions and answers. So please take note of what you'd like to dig into or dig into a little more deeply. So an overview of freight mobility planning, we'll start at the federal level. We'll start big and then work our way back down to our study area here in the Charleston region. At the federal level, for transportation planning, we look to the federal legislation available that guides transportation planning. Early iterations of transportation-related legislation was largely focused on congestion management, safety, and efficiency. These last several iterations of federal legislation, however, have shifted the focus away from simply providing improved levels of service or better congestion relief to move towards supporting economic development, economic sustainability, and a big part of that is freight mobility. So the good news there is we're challenged to and required to focus more on freight mobility as a subset of our regional transportation plans. As Sarah mentioned earlier, we develop long-range transportation plans for our metropolitan areas, and those do require a freight section. However, these types of plans that we're starting now, they're not required by the federal government, but they are certainly encouraged, and they do provide guidance to other transportation planning efforts. And so it's a great opportunity for the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments to invest in this deeper dive into freight mobility in our region. So another planning effort at the federal level is an approach to what's called mega-regional planning. The map in front of you illustrates mega-regions as defined by the Federal Highway Administration. And what we do with this, if you take a closer look, you'll see that we are located in the Piedmont region here in the southeastern United States. And you know, and I know that the box on the back of your truck really doesn't care where it's going. It doesn't care if it's going from one city limit to another county to another state. It needs to go from its point of origin to its point of destination, regardless of the political boundaries. Therefore, this philosophy and this approach of mega-regional planning emerged as a topic of significance and an interest for transportation planners. What that means for this plan is as we compile data and we look at goods movements, where are those boxes coming from and going to, that study will not be limited to this tri-county area. We'll be drawing from data sources that go well beyond our defined study area so that we can understand that supply chain and where commodities are coming from and going to and what modes of transportation they're using. So keeping mega regions in mind, one thing we do when we first get started, and as we're now getting started in this planning effort, is looking to other freight mobility plans available in our region. As Diane mentioned, we know that the South Carolina Department of Transportation has a statewide freight plan available to us. There's a freight plan that was developed for the Central Midlands region as well as the Greater Charlotte region. And while we certainly don't do a copy and paste of what those plans include, what we do try to do is review those to understand where we have some common goals and objectives in our freight mobility planning. We can also draw from those experiences where they've engaged the transportation industry to see what kinds of challenges are facing shippers and carriers so that we have a feel for what's already happening in the community. We can also seek opportunities to align with those because it's almost like a strength in numbers type of an opportunity where we can complement those planning efforts. So digging into our region, the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments kicked off this freight plan a couple months ago with us to take a closer look at the Tri-County region. So let's talk about what our scope of work is going to look like and what this process is going to look like. So many of you have probably participated in other planning efforts, whether it was a long-range transportation plan, perhaps it was the regional transit framework plan that BCDCOG developed a couple years ago, or you've participated in the development of a project in the region. And we do have a lot of similarities with those types of planning efforts, but we also have some differences. So at a very high level, a comparison of the two, some commonalities include the alignment with partner agencies such as SCDOT and FHWA, as mentioned earlier and Diane mentioned. We work very closely with these partners because there are very few things we can try to implement in a region without holding hands with SCDOT and FHWA. And we also have a lot of opportunities for data sharing and, again, kind of aligning goals and objectives. We'll be examining existing conditions and forecasting needs, but that's very similar to other planning efforts, but it's unique in that we will be focusing on the freight system. So highways, railroads, air cargo, that's where we'll be focusing our energy, not necessarily all of our local streets, unless we see that they're playing a role in the freight system. We've got economic context listed here, and that's a bit different from a traditional plan. We'll be doing some extensive economic studies that I'll talk more about in a few slides. But this is quite a bit different, and we'll certainly want to understand the value of freight in planning for our transportation system because it's a critical piece of the puzzle. The public engagement for a freight mobility plan is very, very important, but it's also quite different from the traditional outreach program you may have seen for something like a long-range transportation plan. You won't see a series of just general open houses where people drop in for, between 5 and 7 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. We won't see those types of meetings as much, but rather a focused outreach effort where we look to people like you all on the Freight Advisory Committee to provide feedback on work plan development and also some targeted outreach to members of our transportation industry, railroaders, shippers, carriers, and those types of economic developers to understand what their business looks like, where it's headed, and how can the public transportation system and the private transportation network support their businesses, and how do we need to adapt to their changing needs. This will also include public outreach for communities who may have concerns related to freight, and that's very much a to be determined because we don't know what those are yet. And then finally, similar to other plans, we will get into the prioritization of freight-related recommendations, and that will be in alignment with South Carolina's Act 114, which governs our project prioritization process, and also tied in closely with our economic analysis to understand the value of these benefits. So moving into what those work products look like, this is also a bit different from a traditional transportation plan. With a regional freight mobility plan, what we do is we end up putting plan recommendations into two major buckets. One, our projects, and this is where you would expect to see plan recommendations. It could be a roadway capacity project or a rail capacity project. It could be a bridge replacement concept or making other new intermodal connectors. It could be something related to truck parking or traffic operations like an ITS type system. The other bucket of recommendations, however, get much more into policy. And so this is where we may take a look at how we're setting guidelines for new roadway design or redesign. It could be something like an educational partnership where we see, perhaps we need to develop a program or support a more closely connected relationship between the technical school system and the transportation industry to address those types of needs. And then land use and economic development policies or programs may also come into play. So other freight plan work products that may not be direct products, but rather spin-off products that we typically see with a regional freight mobility plan like this. The first two listed here, relationships and regional collaboration. This is a unique opportunity for public sector representatives to work hand in hand with private sector partners across the entire region. Unfortunately, it's infrequent that these different groups have a facilitated dialogue, and we hope to provide that, and we hope it continues beyond the development of this plan. Other programs or work products that can spin out of this are freight-related grant programs. There's a significant amount of federal freight dollars out there that are certainly appropriate to discuss when developing this type of plan. And then there are public and private partnerships. We may see that there are some opportunities, and truck parking tends to be one of those good opportunities where we may see a deficiency in the amount of available truck parking, but perhaps that's more appropriate for private investment than it is public. And so we'll be exploring those opportunities as well. So here's a snapshot of our study area. One of the first things we will do is take stock of the regional transportation network. And we're going through that process now, compiling all sorts of data from all sorts of sources to understand which pieces and parts of the network are being used today. So these are highways, railroads, air cargo facilities, to understand what's happening now and understanding the condition of that network. Now, I said that we weren't going to focus on every road in the region, but what we do is we start with every road in the region, and then we narrow that down to identify what will eventually be our strategic freight network. That doesn't mean we disregard other roads or facilities, but this is where we will focus the vast majority of our work and our recommendations. Because in the world of freight mobility planning, resiliency is a critical piece. And that's understanding what our strategic freight network is and knowing where we may need redundancies. And I don't want to rip off the scab and bring up the Wando Bridge exercise or experience, but understanding the role of that bridge on our strategic freight network and understanding where we may need redundancies to keep freight moving. Should we have emergencies like that, that is where we use that plan for the strategic freight network and understand and plan for healthy condition of that network. When we forecast our needs for that network, we look at a variety of things. The easy, right off the bat items we look at are safety and then the capacity or infrastructure needs. This is well-documented data that we have available to us. Where are we having freight-related safety issues or even non-freight-related safety issues that affect the mobility of freight, but then also capacity and infrastructure needs. These could be load-rated bridges that are too low, the clearance is too low. Clearly, we've got some bottlenecks we will probably need to address. But then we also forecast technology needs as well as our financial constraints. So as mentioned, we will dig in very deeply to the economics of freight mobility. Our team of economists are already up and running with some commodity flow data to help us quantify the value of freight for our region and our region's facilities. We take a look at freight movements in a couple different categories. We start with freight volume to understand what is the volume of goods movement in the region, and then we look at that by mode. Is it going by train? Is it coming in by ship? Is it going by truck? Is it a combination of those, air cargo? And then what direction is it moving? Is it coming into, out of, through the region, among the region, regional destinations? And then we also slice it again by commodity type, because all of those elements affect how we need to plan for the efficient movement of it. And then we take a look at the economic impact associated with those movements, what that means in terms of employment today, what it could mean for employment in the future, what it means for our region's income and output. You know, how much money are we making and how much money are we spending as a region? And then finally, what's critically important, and I think everyone on the line will appreciate this, is packaging it up in a very clearly presented product. And what we are looking at doing is producing an economic impact summary brochure for you so that you can comfortably go to elected officials or your counterparts and say, listen, this is the value of our roads. This is the value of our freight network here in moving freight. And it's critical that we invest in these facilities. So we're very much looking forward to that piece. As mentioned, we do some land use integration planning. This is a slightly different approach than what you've probably seen in the past, where a freight mobility plan will not replace your existing comprehensive plans. What we do instead is take stock of those comp plans, those comprehensive plans, and see how your land uses are distributed and any kind of forecast you may have available to see what those development patterns look like, kind of that spatial distribution of where different types of development are happening. And then the fun part is we get to overlay that with our strategic freight network and find out what that relationship is. Can that network support those land use patterns? If the answer is yes, then we're in good shape. If the answer is no, then we go through a process of working with all of you on the advisory committee, as well as our local planning partners, to say, you know, how can we improve this connection between land use patterns and the transportation system as it pertains to freight. A lot of times we will find that land use development patterns are misaligned with the transportation network, but our partners in the economic development community will quickly, they can probably tell us without even blinking what their customers are looking for. When companies are coming to our region and they want to grow here, they know what kinds of infrastructure they need. So we can help them make that connection and do perhaps some smarter planning to make sure those things are in place. One thing to keep in mind here is it's not just about development and supporting that growth, but also preventing conflicts. A lot of times if you've got heavy industrial land uses right next to residential land uses, that obviously creates some conflict in the community. It can cause safety challenges and whatnot on your transportation system. So what we can do is not say yes or no, those two things shouldn't be side by side, but if they are, how should we design our roads and facilities so that everybody can use it safely? It's almost like a new take on complete streets. Truck technology, freight technology, not just for trucks. We will be taking a look at a wide range of technology options. On the screen in front of you, it's certainly not an all-encompassing list of technological advances, and I swear I feel like every week there's something new for us to consider in the world of transportation technology. But we've all heard the term, we can't build our way out of congestion. So what we certainly want to do is examine these various technologies that are on the ground in other communities and what makes a lot of sense here with our region, and how can these different concepts complement the growth and development patterns we're having here and address some of the challenges we see. And again, this is not an all-encompassing list, but these items will certainly be on the list. Finally, I know that I have not found a money tree. I don't think any of you have found a money tree yet, but we will need to take a look at how to finance improvements, regardless of what those improvements are, whether it's a project or a policy type of a program. So a number of things will happen. We will develop planning level cost estimates for our recommendations, including some of those programs we may be looking at. As mentioned, we'll be examining freight-related grant opportunities that are out there. We have a team of economic development and financial specialists who keep in close touch with counterparts at FHWA and USDOT to identify what these different funding programs are and look for opportunities to bring those grant programs into these types of plans so that not only is the plan appropriate for this community, but we can make recommendations that are actually competitive. When we look at our peer cities and our communities around the country, how can we make sure that projects for the Charleston region are going to be competitive against perhaps the needs over, several states away, and show very well whenever we're looking to find those funds. And then finally, on both financial planning and implementation, is how to take this regional freight mobility plan and integrate that into local and state plans. This plan alone will not get a bunch of projects built, but what it will do is facilitate the integration of lots of plans, lots of project ideas into lots of other plans. One thing I would love to bring to everyone's attention, and Diane Lackey from SCDOT alluded to this, but while the BCD Regional Freight Mobility Plan is being developed, the Appalachian Regional Freight Mobility Plan is being developed simultaneously. The scopes of work, the range of topics are nearly identical, and our same CDM Smith consulting team, together with Transsystems and Modern Mobility Partners, we're developing both of those plans. So while this will produce two unique freight mobility plans, there will be lots of opportunities for collaboration across these two regions. And many of you on this line probably have an interest in both plans because things that are happening at the Charleston end of I-26 may or may not be successful if there isn't an opportunity to connect at the upstate end of the I-26 corridor. Certainly State Ports Authority is represented on this committee, and they certainly have a vested interest in both study areas. And then when we start talking about policies and programs and federal grant opportunities, you really do find strength in numbers, where if that cooperation is there and USDOT sees us working at a mega regional level, reinforcing their planning interests, it really raises the stakes and the possibility of this plan's recommendations to be successful. So I'm sure I've worn you out, and I'm going to stop talking. And now that you know a little bit more about what will be in this scope of work and what we're developing for you, I'd love to know which pieces and parts of the Freight Mobility Plan is most exciting to you. Sometimes we ask this question like, okay, somebody dropped this plan on your desk. What chapter are you going to open up first? Capacity, we don't have any capacity problems in the Charleston area, do we? I say that jokingly, of course. So I see capacity, I see land use integration, economics. Okay. All right, we'll close it out, but thanks for those thoughts. Thanks for those thoughts. We'll certainly keep that in mind as we move ahead. So let's have a stop and pause. clearly if we were together in person, this would be much more conversational and host some open dialogue. But I think, as Amy mentioned, you can either hit that raise your hand button to open up your line and start asking, Amy will call on you to ask a question verbally, or if you don't want to go that route, please type it in the chat box to the right. And as we get into that, just to give you a glimpse of what's ahead in the presentation, we have about maybe 5, 6 more slides left, where we'll walk through what's next, what our schedule is looking like, and what the rest of our meetings should be looking like. Any questions?
Jenny, I don't see any hands raised, but I see some typing happening.
Okay. Be careful. I know some of you. I'll call you out.
Okay, so Jenny, here's us a question from Coleman Thompson. What is the SCDOT or CDM Smith projected population and traffic growth rate for the BCD area?
That's a loaded question, Coleman. I'm not going to throw numbers at you because to me, there's too much of a range from one data source to another. But what we will do is quantify that growth. We'll use the BCD region has a regional travel demand model, and the planners at Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments went through a pretty exhaustive land use planning exercise to forecast not only the total number of population and employment growth, but also the distribution of that growth. So what we'll do is present all of that and what those growth rates are based upon. And then same thing with traffic, because one corridor will grow at a very different rate from another corridor. So we'll put those things together and present it to you and talk through that. That's actually the focus of our next Freight Advisory Committee meeting, is presenting some of that initial data.
Jenny, you might have to call on some people. This is a quiet crowd. Looks like Coleman might be typing a response. He says thank you.
No
I
problem,
don't see any
Coleman.
additional questions.
Okay. Well,
All right.
we did get them right after lunch. Hopefully people aren't too sleepy this afternoon. Okay, well, don't be shy. If you have more questions, we'll certainly regroup with an additional opportunity to ask, or just have some dialogue as well here at the end of the presentation. So what can we expect next? Our total, as mentioned briefly earlier, we've got a pretty aggressive schedule. What that means is we hope to have a draft plan near the end of this year. And you're probably wondering how on earth we would do that in 6 months. But we actually got started a few months ago. So a lot of the data collection, data processing has been in motion for a few months. So some of those initial work products are beginning to come together in draft form. So from here on out, you can expect these meetings to be pretty thick with data. And what is in front of you is an overview of our future meetings as a group. Now, what we're hoping to do, what we've developed in partnership with the Appalachian Council of Governments together with the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments, is an approach to collaborate, yet also have some independent analysis time. So what we're looking at is hosting these meetings with your counterparts for the Appalachian region on common dates if possible, if that works for both groups. But meeting monthly, what we would like to do is have a meeting of just this group, the Charleston Freight Advisory, committee, the BCD Regional Freight Advisory Committee, to talk specifically about the BCD regional plan, and we'll distribute the meeting materials about a week ahead, as you're probably accustomed to getting. And those will be PowerPoints. It could be a technical memorandum, something like this for you to review and have a week to sort of read and digest. Then we come together as a group and discuss it, explain anything that isn't clear, and then also get your feedback on those issues. Then we would have a form of a lunch and learn that is open to a much broader population, and both groups would participate in that. Your counterparts for the Appalachian region would participate in that. We could have other members of the community participate if they were interested. But the idea there is to raise the awareness of freight and educate our community about these freight-related topics, because ultimately, if you know it, you can support it, or you can provide other valuable feedback that perhaps you're not supportive of. So what's in front of you now is a list of tentative dates for those meetings, and under the column that says topic, those are the plan topics that we would like to talk through with you. Those are the work products we want to present to you and talk through and get your feedback on. And then in that far right column would be the lunch and learn topics, ways that, you know, some things happening in the freight industry that you may want to know more about. And that would be a little more generic in nature, not necessarily focused on this region, but more of an exploration of that topic or issue. One thing to note while you're looking at this, we're going to have a polling question later. So you see that we have these to be determined boxes here. This entire right column is a tentative list. These are things that we would love to bring to you all in an educational forum. And if there are additional topics, you'll have an opportunity to tell us what you'd love to hear and learn about. Future communications related to the plan, this will not be limited to these monthly meetings. What we have in place is a project website hosted through the BCDCOG website, and I'll show you a picture of that here in just a second. We will also be developing and pushing some social media posts. What's really, really important here, and you'll hear me use this term a lot over the next 6 to 8 months, is raising the awareness of freight. We all know it's very easy to sit in traffic and get frustrated this big truck is in front of us or that train is blocking the road. But what we hope to do is use this planning effort to help the community understand where is that truck going and why is it important that that truck gets to where it's going, and why is it possibly okay just to take a deep breath and wait for that train to pass because that train is bringing work to some of my neighbors. And that too will be going through the BCDCOG social media feeds. So hopefully what you'll see is as those begin to get developed and pushed out, if you could share them, we'll look to you to share those with your neighbors and colleagues and so on. As mentioned, we'll continue to have these Freight Advisory Committee meetings and the educational webinars. We'll be producing a series of publications. So this will be a collection of technical memoranda, executive summary brochures, and then of course our final freight mobility plan. And then presentations. We'll be making presentations to you all. And then as we get closer to a final plan, we will have a series of presentations available for certain audiences, right? So if you are a member of the Charleston Motor Carrier Association and they would like to have a presentation about the plan, or, you know, some other group like Rotary, et cetera, we'll be working closely with Sarah and BCDCOG staff to make these types of opportunities available. Email, a special note here, as Amy mentioned when we first got started, Sarah Cox will be your single point of contact on the plan. So all of your updates, meeting invitations, other updates related to the plan will come to you from Sarah Cox, and her door, I'm going to speak for Sarah, her door is wide open, so any future questions, random thoughts, we invite them at any time. Please send them to Sarah. So if you're driving down the road and you see something that you want us to think about or be aware of, please push those thoughts towards Sarah and she will relay them on to us. In front of you is a screenshot of the Freight Plan webpage that, as mentioned, is hosted through the BCDCOG website. So that address is right in front of you if you want to jot it down or go ahead and bookmark it. We'll be working closely with Daniel Brock over at BCDCOG to keep this webpage fresh and update and upload our plan materials. Examples are, the presentation from today will be hosted there so that, if you want a copy of it, you can get it there. If you want to show a friend about it or share it with a colleague, it will certainly be there and available to you. Okay, so as mentioned, we're going to ask you, what other topics might you want us to include in a lunch and learn or an educational webinar type of opportunity? There are lots of things out there. What would you like to learn about? Nothing. Boy, y'all are easy. Okay, possibility of tolling I-95. Okay. How to accommodate movements to and from Leatherman. Okay. Frequencies of trains. Okay. Automation. Yep. Technology and automation. Okay. I love it. Keep them coming. And again, even if you don't think of it today, feel free to pass these thoughts over to Sarah as well after today if you're thinking about it, and or even as deliverables start to happen and we're talking about the strategic freight network or something like that, and a new thought pops into your head. We want to remain flexible on these types of things because similar to the population and the employment forecast and community related impacts, things like that, we don't know what they are yet. So a lot of these types of things will emerge as topics of interest as we move through the plan development. So we look forward to finding out what those issues are as they emerge. Oh, good question. How does the Low Country Rapid Transit fit into the plan? We will. Is that a question? Well, I can give a short answer to that, but perhaps that's a good topic to bring up as an educational topic. Okay, and Joint Base Charleston Gates affected by rail. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Okay, well, let's go ahead and close that poll and certainly keep comments coming through the chat box. So before we jump ahead to that question, to answer the question about where does the Low Country Rapid Transit fit into a freight plan, it's a very interesting question, and when we take a look at the strategic freight network and understanding where freight vehicles need to go, it's critical that we take a look at the entire right-of-way and who's using the right-of-way. With the Rapid Transit project, looking at the 52 corridor for the most part of US 78 in different areas as well. I mean, they're still in their alternatives analysis phase, but there are some areas where we know they're most likely looking at including that type of transit facility. So what our team of planners will do is take a look at that use of the right-of-way and the eventual design of that right-of-way and see where we could have potential conflicts and safety concerns with freight-type vehicles. But then we can also look for opportunities to combine those planning efforts. Because if you take a step back and think about what does a rapid transit vehicle look like? What do other bus vehicles look like? They're really not that different from a pretty large commercial vehicle or other heavy cargo carrying truck. So what we'll want to do is take a look at the design guidelines, the concepts they're using for that corridor, and see where can we make sure that as they design that, they're also accommodating safe movement of freight vehicles. It also becomes a big opportunity for synergy in technology. So a lot of power, a lot of electrification of that corridor will be required to keep that bus rapid transit system moving, and think about things like signal preemption and items like that they'll be looking at. Those things can be very helpful in many urban freight mobility improvement concepts. So these are some opportunities where we can really put our heads together and not only plan for improved safety, but also some efficiency. I hope that covered your question. I could go on all day on that one, by the way. Any other questions?
Jenny, there was a question that we received from Charles to see if there was a possibility to see who is on the Appalachian Freight Advisory Committee.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Here's what we can do. We will share the web address for the Appalachian Freight Plan itself, and also get with that Council of Governments to see if they plan to publish that list, and if not, see how we can make that available to this group. Yeah, good question.
Okay. We have another question from Charles. Keep them coming. He says, we have traffic counts for most, if not all, freight corridors in the region, but do we have freight traffic counts for those corridors?
So yes and no. We have a lot of, we call them classification counts, where in anticipation of doing a freight mobility plan, we have politely asked that whenever people are developing projects that they include a classification count in that. So we do have a pretty good stack of class counts for the I-26 corridor, the US 52 corridor, the 526 corridor. Pretty sure we've got a pretty good stack of them over in Mount Pleasant. But it's certainly not comprehensive. It's not like the region has been blanketed with classification counters, but we have a good enough sample, I believe, but we'll certainly identify sooner than later if we need to conduct any of those types of counts. Most likely we don't, because we also draw from, it's called the NPM RDS, which is a national data set of travel time data that provides some specific travel times by vehicle type. So we're able to sort of patch it together where we don't have those ground counts. But if anybody on the call is doing a project, always ask for classification counts, because we love to use those.
Thanks, Jenny. I don't see any other questions right now or any hands raised.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry if I left this slide, but we would love to ask this polling question if this meeting format works for you. As we move forward through the COVID-19 health and safety protocols of our various agencies and organizations. We, for better or for worse, will be working in a virtual environment for probably the months of June and July. And then by late July, we'll reassess the situation to see what most of our partners are doing and what BCDCOG's guidance is on this, to see what our choices are. But we as a consulting team, we're very flexible in what we can provide and work with, and we want to make sure that this is as comfortable for as many users as possible between now and then. And then also moving forward, we may, as we expand these types of opportunities to a larger audience, we would certainly want to make sure we use a satisfactory or a pleasant platform for that. So appreciate your feedback on that. Okay. So to wrap it up, I will close it out with another opportunity. If anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand to speak, or you can type a question. But I'm going to leave Sarah's contact info up here so that everyone knows how to get in touch with her, how to follow BCDCOG on social media. And I might hand it back over to Sarah to wrap up the meeting. Any final thoughts?
Thank you, Jenny. And again, I think you spoke well for me in terms of please feel free to reach out to me. We are looking to this group to be really vocal. You are stakeholders in the system, in the network, in our region. Definitely guide us to make sure that our plan is addressing our unique needs and what we anticipate for our region. So we are looking to you to pretty much help us make sure we identify and address those issues through this planning process. In terms of, I think Jenny also said that we're moving towards that data-driven approach to addressing our issues, whether it be congestion, freight mobility, etc. And I think the questions, for example, that Charles asked, as well as Coleman, in terms of a byproduct of this plan would be those mining those kind of freight land use, those data sources, and actually packaging it in a usable way that we could actually progress in terms of freight planning for local jurisdictions to utilize those products as well. And I also would like to draw your attention that as this plan progresses and work products are produced, we do want to start building that freight website and web page, as well as those products will be added there, as well as any for those lunch and learns, those educational components. We definitely want to start building our freight capacity and resources. So we would like to keep adding to that site and let that be our regional go-to to get those great nuggets of information and help us plan better for our region in terms of that development and goods movement. And I think, I guess at this point, if we have any closing comments, it doesn't have to be a question. If there's any closing comments that you want to make. All right. Again, we thank you for being part of this. I'll turn it over to Mr. Skipper in terms of any last remarks.
No, ma'am. We appreciate the information and look forward to contributing to having a successful plan when we're finished. We appreciate everybody's attendance.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, guys, I'm going to close down the meeting.